Hey everyone, welcome to the Her on Top podcast, episode 8. Today we are going to discuss boundaries in relationships. Alex and I define what a boundary is, describe different types of boundaries, decide how to handle setting a boundary when it's not easy, and explain what happens when we do not set boundaries. As a disclaimer, these episodes are based off of my clinical knowledge, but as I am not your therapist, please take care with all that is discussed and talk to your own therapist or seek out a therapist if you are wanting to dive deeper into these topics for yourself. If you enjoy this podcast, please follow us on Spotify, Apple, and wherever you find your podcasts. And don't forget to leave a rating and review with a comment or question you would like us to discuss in one of our episodes. For more fun and reminders of upcoming episodes, you can follow us on Instagram at HerOnTopPod. All right, let's get into it. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to our podcast.
Happy Friday, guys.
Yes, happy
Hello.
Friday. How has your week been, Alex?
I feel like my week has been quite a bit of a grind this week for work. Like it was just a lot. Like there's a lot of things. The end 2 weeks of my month are always crazy. Like those are my 2 crazy weeks of the month at work. The first two of the month, usually pretty chill. But yeah, it just got kind of nuts. And then I'm happy it's the weekend. How are you doing, my dear? How was your week?
I feel like it's also been a grind. It's kind of in tax season right now, so on top of all my other on top of all my other stuff, I'm trying to get all my tax stuff together for my business and for our household and everything. So that's just a lot. But
You know what I'll just say as a PSA to the United States government is, I would maybe enjoy doing my taxes more if I had more benefits that actually applied to me from what I'm paying for, childcare, all kinds of healthcare
yeah.
programs, all kinds of things we could do with all that money, but we just don't. So, but I won't bring that up today more than I needed to there.
Yeah. We could both get on soapboxes about that.
We could
But
spend an hour on that whole thing. So we won't
yeah.
for you guys. We know that we have a topic of today, and it is definitely not taxes and the way that the United States government is utilizing our money that we pay them in taxes. So we won't.
No. No. But this week was Valentine's Day. Did
Happy Love
you
Day, everyone.
Yeah, happy Love Day. Did you do anything exciting or fun or
Uh,
romantic?
romantic. Yes, kind of. I mean, well, not kind of. I won't do that to him. No, it was incredibly romantic. So since we have our wedding in July, we have kind of. I mean, even though I hate to say this, I tend to get gifts for holidays where we've agreed in this year that we're not gonna do gifts like
Mhm,
anniversary, and we weren't gonna do a big like Valentine's Day thing or any of these stuff, right? Because we're like all of our money is going towards the biggest party to celebrate our love this summer.
mhm,
So we're not gonna but he was very good. He sent like the most amazing arrangement to my office at work, which was absolutely lovely. And we always do cards. I'm a card Nazi. I love a
mhm,
card. I keep all of them.
mhm,
So any holiday, even if we do no gifts, like I want you to write me something. Like that means more to me than the gift.
mhm,
So we did cards and we're going to go have a little bit of dinner tonight, but I'm also weird. Like I'm not a normal adult. Like I still feel like I'm 12. So if it's a Wednesday and it's Valentine's Day, it's like I'm not going out. That's a
mhm,
school night. I don't do out on school nights. Like that is not happening.
mhm.
So I'm not really a normal adult in that way. So I just punt it to the weekend and I'm like, that's
Yeah.
when we're going to do it. How about you guys? What'd you guys do?
We were kind of the same. We're not big on like, this isn't a big holiday for us. I don't really care that much about Valentine's Day, but my mom always gave me, like,
Baskets or like,
little basket
yep.
yeah, just, like,
I grew up
little
with,
stuff.
yep.
It wasn't ever something big,
Cute. No.
but, so I like to do that. So, we got Rex some gifts, and we always, like, leave them out so that they're there when he wakes up, and, yeah, we did cards too. Although, I feel like we need a different system for cards. Cards are so freaking expensive. It's
I
insane how much you can spend for cards. And now it's like, okay, I want to get a card for my husband, but I also want to get a card for Rex to my husband for Dada. And then
Oh, I didn't
And
even think
then,
about with
like
kids when you need
yeah,
oh,
and
now
then he
you
gets a card for me, and then he gets a card for Rex
from
to
Rex for
mama,
you.
and then we got a card for, like, grandparents. It's just, like, there's so many cards for every occasion, and I swear Mother's Day and Father's Day, I loathe. I feel
Are they?
like well, just
I know what you
see,
mean because of this shit.
both me and my husband have 2 sets of parents 'cause both of our parents are divorced, so there's just, like, a million cards to buy at all times, and I feel like I can spend, like, upwards to, like, 70, $80, like, just on cards, and it's just, like, I don't wanna buy cards anymore, so we need a different system for cards, but I love
Okay.
the sentiment around
Yes.
cards.
I love the
Yeah.
sentiment, and I'm kind of well, and I get you there because I am not a normal like, I don't go to a Target, I don't go to a
Mhm.
Walgreens for my cards. I'm really odd about my cards.
Mhm.
I really like a cheeky card. Like,
Mm.
I want a super cheeky card. I want it to either kinda make fun of you a little bit, I want it to be very well written, I want the graphics really g so I have all these little stores
Mhm.
around Seattle that sell ridiculously like $9 cards, like $9 and
Mhm.
$10 bloody cards, but the
Yeah.
paper is amazing, the graphics are way better, like, you can tell it's not like, "Oh, I love you," like, "Your heart is my heart today." No, I don't want that, I want something funny and, like, or super sexy. Like there was some one store in San Diego when I lived there years ago. If anyone goes to San Diego frequently or is planning a trip, go to a place called Pigment, like the color pigment. It's
Mhm.
an amazing store. It has everything cool you could ever think from books to water bottles to all the cool stuff. Walls of cards. So that was the time in my life when I got super into cards because they had so many and they
Mhm.
were so funny and original and like made by these artists and like I loved it. And now I try to recreate that again and yeah, like you said, it costs a lot. Costs a freaking lot.
Yeah.
But I can't really complain because right now I give one person a card. But I will
Yeah.
say, okay, since this is a relationship podcast and sex and all of the things, right?
Mhm.
Since we brought up Valentine's Day, before we move on to our topic of the day, I will just say the sweetest thing that I think from this week that was
Mhm.
Valentine's Day related
Mhm.
was I got a call from my mom on Valentine's Day, and she wanted to wish me a Valentine's Day, whatever. And she just goes, "Do you know what your father did?" And keep in mind, for any listeners, my parents are divorced. They've been
Mhm.
divorced for almost a decade now. They were married for almost 30 years, but yeah. So that's where we're at.
Mhm.
They're way more than cordial with each other. That is 100% true.
Mhm.
So that's not the word. But he had roses sent to her house, to his
Mm.
ex-wife's house for Valentine's Day of her favorite rose, and then with one rose that's the color of her university of her alma mater in the middle, which is really weird. I don't know why he does that. Like, she's such a nerd. She doesn't love sports. She doesn't love any of the things of like what carries on from her alma mater other than the lectures. So I don't know why he does that. He likes her alma mater more than her. But I heard that and I was like, that was actually the thing that warmed my heart the most this Valentine's Day was hearing that. And I was like, Dad, well played. That was really, really sweet of you. Like, that's really nice.
Mhm.
So it was just one of those things where I was like, it kind of restored my faith in love a little bit more this year when I heard that. I was like, I like that. It's kind of cute.
Yeah. Yeah. I am not a flowers person. I love flowers, but flowers die, and then I have
They
to
do.
clean them up and throw them away. So, I'd rather get snacks. That's kind of my thing. I'd rather get, like, my
Like
favorite
a bag of all your
chocolate.
faves.
Yeah, some chocolate, cupcake, cookie, whatever,
Are you
but
a salty snack person at all?
I mean,
I'm not.
sure, but I
I'm
much
not.
rather a sweet
You and
than
me
a
both.
salty. Yeah.
Same. Like you could line the top of the fridge with like salty snacks and like maybe I'll have one once a week, but like no. But yeah, sweets give me all the sweet treats in
Yeah.
existence.
Yeah, or experiences. Like, we got some childcare for Sunday and are gonna go to this little coffee shop in downtown Gig Harbor. It's a coffee shop and a pottery painting studio, so we're gonna go paint some pottery. We've been wanting to do that for a long time because we go to this place all the time, and we just haven't actually sat down and painted pottery. So we're going to go do that as a little date on Sunday.
I love that for you guys.
Mhm.
I love that. Well, everybody, listeners, happy Valentine's Day. We hope you had a great
Yeah.
day. Galentine's Day, Valentine's Day,
Yeah.
wear all
However,
black day, however you choose to celebrate the day.
yeah.
Happy week, everybody. Happy middle of February.
Yeah. We also got some random snow this week. I don't know if
Yeah,
you got in any
yeah, we did, and it
snow,
pissed
but
me off. Pissed me off. For me, because and for any listeners we may have that are not in the Seattle-ish area, right? Okay. I understand that the rest of the world can handle snow. If you're not really familiar with Seattle and the at least downtownish surrounding area, we're almost as hilly as San Francisco. Like it's
yeah.
very hilly. So it's really hard to drive. So 3 inches to 4 inches shuts the whole city down. Like we're done. Everyone is at home. No one goes
Yeah.
to work. No one goes to school. It's all done.
Yeah.
So my whole thing with snow in this town is it's like, don't give me a measly half an inch.
I
I
know.
get out of nothing with a half an inch. Give me
Yeah.
3 or don't be there at all. One or the
Exactly.
other.
Exactly.
I can't, and I'm not the greatest of all drivers because I'm very impatient, so snow, ice doesn't do well for me either. It just
No.
it's not my fave.
You also usually don't have, like, snow ice cars either. You usually have, like, little cars,
Yeah, I have
not
little
like
fun
a
cars that are
SUV.
no, I don't. I have little fun cars that are basically made to drive up and down the PCH in the beautiful sunshine. That's the car I like to have. I don't want a snowmobile.
Yeah. Yeah.
I live in the wrong state. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's all
Yeah.
okay.
All right.
We'll
Well,
get on the topic.
we've spent 10 minutes on this, so let's move on. Our topic for today, listeners, if you're still with us and made it through that,
You did.
is
It was fun.
yeah, um, is boundaries. So we are talking about boundaries in relationships and what that looks like, how hard it is to set and hold boundaries because we all know that it is. Um, so we're
I'm
just
horrible
gonna
at it.
yeah, so am I. So we're just gonna dive in and chat about what it looks like to try to have boundaries and what it looks like when you don't have boundaries in relationships. Um, so let's kick it off and talk about what are boundaries, because that's also an important thing. We need to define what a boundary actually is. So the best way of describing this is really
Can I
simple.
ask a question?
Yes.
I've heard it described many ways,
Okay.
but I'm just going to ask you.
Yeah.
One definition I heard of one that I kind of liked that tell me if I'm crazy, because since you're about to give it, I want to see if I'm like super off, right?
Okay.
Love a betting situation. Anyways, so it the boundary that you set for other people, it's not necessarily a wall for other people to not come in.
Mhm.
It's a wall for me saying, this is what I am okay with, and this is what I can handle
Mhm.
for me. So
Mhm.
please respect my wall of what I am able to give, do, handle, whatever the situation is. But
Yep.
it's not like a big wall to the other person of don't come in, don't do this, don't be here. It's my little wall that I've created that I'm asking respect for. Am I anywhere near the ballpark?
Yes, you are. Yep.
Yes.
Yes, boundaries are for you, not for anyone else. They are guidelines on what's okay for you and what's not okay for you. And a lot of it comes around to like, how do you feel safe and how are you going to keep yourself safe in relation to other people? Um, but yeah, it really simply just boils down to what's okay for you, what's not okay for you. And the boundary is you communicating that to other people, and then the hard part is the holding of the boundary, because even though you communicate that boundary to somebody else, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to respect the boundary. We hope that they do. But if they don't, it's up to you to hold that boundary for yourself. So it usually has to come with some type of consequence, or if that feels a little too harsh, it can be something that you are going to do if they don't hold that boundary. So it's
Okay.
like, this is my boundary. And if you don't respect it, this is what I will do to keep myself safe in that situation. If
That
that
makes
makes
total
sense.
sense. No, that makes total sense.
Hmm.
I think the only word that throws me off in it for parts
Hmm.
of it, which it shouldn't, like,
Hmm.
here's the weird part of what I'm thinking right now. This should not throw me off in any way. But the
Yeah.
word safety and being safe,
Hmm.
that's, I think, the part of it where, when we're not talking about like boundaries for a child, like, we want you to be safe. This is a boundary. Do not cross this because we want
Hmm.
you safe. Get
Hmm.
that. But I guess when it comes to, like, emotional safety and, like, the realm of that, I don't know
Hmm.
why that kinda, like, word just sounds off a little to me. Maybe that's probably something wrong with me, which is fine. But
Mm.
I just find it the safety word interesting to me.
Yeah. Do you want to say more about that?
I don't really know how I feel about that more, so I think
Okay.
I'll leave that one be. But it
Okay.
just I don't know why, but the word just it creates a certain, like, visual or description in my head, I guess, which I think is kinda
Hmm.
interesting with that. But anyways,
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll give some examples of boundaries. So there's physical boundaries and emotional slash intellectual boundaries. So an example of a physical boundary would be like wanting to be asked before being touched. And I think this comes up a lot in my work with couples around sex and kind of guiding them through the process of getting back to feeling more comfortable around sex. It's okay for
and
you
engaging
to,
it.
yeah, and engaging it. It's okay for you to want a boundary around your body. And we actually, we have body language that if you kind of, step away from somebody and create space between you and someone else, that's you saying, like, I physically need some space from you. Please don't come closer to me. But you can
The
also do
amount of
that.
people who don't recognize that when you do it in public, though, is
Mhm.
honestly shocking to me.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, but also asking for something like, I would like to be asked before being touched. Um, and then again, we have to have something that you do to hold that boundary. So if you don't ask me before touching me, I guess you'd have to kind of come up with whatever feels best to you in that situation. If it's like your partner, maybe you might give them a reminder and you might physically move yourself away and let them know that, I'm going to want you to ask me to be touched. If you don't ask me before you touch me, I'm going to create physical space for me. And I'm going to give you a reminder that, hey, I would really like it if you ask me before you touch me. And maybe it's in certain areas. It doesn't have to be like, you know,
A hug or putting your
yeah,
hand on their knee on the couch.
right.
I get what you mean.
Yeah. But if they're doing something like suggestive, like touching your butt or touching your boobs or whatever, that could be a physical boundary. So that's an example of how we kind of create boundaries around our physical body. And then emotional or intellectual boundary could be saying it's not okay to call me degrading names in an argument, or it's not okay to yell at me in an argument. Those are boundaries that hopefully collectively we both want to be creating in our space of communication with each other.
I'm
And then
so bad at
again,
that.
yeah, well,
Not at calling
it's
people
not easy.
degrading names, but I'm a
Yeah.
yeller. I grew up in a house with a lot of yelling, so I'm very used
Mm,
to it. So unfortunately, when I get upset, that's the biggest one I'm working on because I recognize that most people have a boundary they don't enjoy. Weirdly, they don't enjoy being yelled at.
yeah.
Shocking,
Well,
but
I
I get
think
you.
I think you bring up a really good point, though, is that a lot of times what we experience growing up becomes what we know and what we feel
Yeah.
comfortable with, and also how oftentimes then we deal with that situation because that's what we saw modeled to us growing up. And so when you then have a partner that didn't have that growing up and yelling makes them feel really uncomfortable and really frightened and afraid, that can be a hard thing to negotiate sometimes is like that's a hard boundary of we don't want any yelling And I would say just generally, it's a lot healthier to not yell in a conversation. But yeah, it can be hard when that's something that you're used to.
I always make it worse when I yell. It never
Mhm.
and the shocking thing is I can notice this now, but do I ever notice it in the moment? Of course freaking not, but it's like,
Mhm.
no, that I never make this better. This never makes the situation easier, better, to a resolution quicker, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. So since that was something that resonated with you, I'm guessing, have you and Connor talked about how that's not something that you guys wanna do and how to have a boundary around that?
Yes. I think the harder part is like I don't know how to best say this, but I guess the hardest part then for us with that one when I do that behavior, right,
Mhm.
is that like cognitively I know that the boundary is somewhat there, that he does not enjoy yelling. And this
Mhm.
is also not here's our other part of it is where we recognize that we both don't want to do that to our child.
Mhm.
So figuring out different ways for me to express how I'm feeling without that piece.
Mhm.
That part is definitely a work in progress for me, but I guess the hard part is that like and here's actually you bring up a great point. I don't think there is enough of a boundary then that we've created so when I yell because nothing happens when I
Mhm.
yell. Like I'm just going off and he's just there. Like it's not there's nothing so maybe actually you bring up a great point that maybe it needs to be that okay, if that's the way that you're going to communicate, I'm going to take a little bit of space and some time away. I'm going to go to a different room.
Yeah.
And when you are ready to talk to me in a more civil manner where you're not yelling, then let's revisit. Then I will revisit this with you in an instant as soon as you're ready to not do that. So I think maybe
Love
actually
that.
you bring up a great point where we don't actually have a boundary created. So when it happens, it just happens. Then we wait for me to be done. It's like a
Yeah.
freaking volcano.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
So
we have, like, an understanding that that's not something that we wanna do, but again, there's no holding the boundary of, "If this happens, then this is what I'm going to do to" again, I'm sure for Connor, it feels like this is not a fun situation for me to be in. I don't wanna put words in his mouth, but maybe even, like, it doesn't feel safe for me to communicate to you in this way of communicating. So, yeah,
oh,
uh,
100%. I know he doesn't feel safe to keep going further with it when I'm in
yeah,
that explosive of a mood because
yeah,
it's just gonna probably escalate. It's not gonna de-escalate.
right, right. So, yeah, what you said is a perfect way of holding the boundary of like, I'm going to remove myself from the situation and yeah, give you some time to cool down. And then I will be here when you're ready to have a conversation in a calmer, more rational headspace.
That's very okay. That you know what? Actually, I love this podcast. There we go. That's something that then I can bring home of, okay, then maybe we implement that and see if that helps to where then and here's the other thing I can see with like just the idea of holding through with whatever boundary it is you've created, right?
Hmm.
Is that when the person does have anytime we as humans have any consequence for any action we take, we do somewhat learn from it. And we do
Hmm.
kind of usually, for the most of us, will tend to shift and move with that. So I
Hmm.
can very much see how, if that happened 3 to 4 times, the amount of time that I'm going to spend being that angry is probably
Hmm.
just going to get lesser and lesser and lesser and lesser because the whole point of it is we want to figure out whatever it is we're arguing about or
Right.
discussing that's getting heated
Hmm.
and I still want to get to the root of that. So
Hmm.
I'm going to put this aside quicker than maybe I would before
Hmm.
because I want to get back at it and get it resolved. So I can
Hmm.
also just see where this also might just speed up a lot of situations that could maybe be drawn out and take a longer time to resolve, that
Hmm.
holding your boundary can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and I think something that you're kind of alluding to as well is the 2 of you have a safe enough relationship where talking about these things should be something that you both are receptive to, like, talking
Yeah.
about this between you and I, and then hopefully between you and him, when you're outside of an argument saying, "You know what? We really don't like to yell in communication with each other. When we have a conflict situation, we don't really want that to be part of it. We know that, it happens sometimes and that's okay, but here's what we want to do to implement that." For some people, that's really hard to talk about and might have a big reaction to the fact that somebody is going to like walk out and leave. Not that they're leaving the premises, not that they're leaving the relationship, but even just creating that space for some people that feels really threatening. So I think it speaks well to the fact that you can talk about that and have a positive reaction to that happening, whereas some people may not. And so that's when it's harder to hold boundaries, is when people do have a bad reaction to you setting a boundary and want to kind of rail against it because they think that, you are doing something that's offensive to them when really it's something that's important to keep, again, you safe and comfortable in what's okay for you.
That makes complete and total sense.
Mhm. Yeah. So, I think there's some people that are easier to set boundaries with than others. Like, I
Definitely.
I feel the same way about my husband. I feel like it's so easy for me to, well, maybe not so easy, but it's a lot easier to say the things that I want and need in our relationship and know that he's gonna hear me and try his best to respect that. And, if he falters, it's not because he's deliberately trying to go against my boundaries. It just might be taking him a while to like remember that and to, adhere to the things that we've talked about. But there's definitely other relationships in my life that are a lot harder to set those boundaries with.
I love that you go there because the one I was gonna say is I feel like even if you and your partner are in sync enough, right, that you like you're
Mhm,
saying, where you guys can easily do that and
mhm,
test them out, see how they work, and
mhm.
then and give grace because we're humans and we don't do everything correctly all the time. Like
Yeah,
we're what's the intention behind it? So give a little grace
right.
too. But the one I think that is the true hardest one, and I think almost every single person in America who has, who has found a partner that you want to spend maybe the rest of your life with, whatever that looks like for you. So you're bringing two families together and you're bringing lots of dynamics of other people
Mhm,
into this. And well, maybe it's not in your direct family that you're creating with this person. They're still
mhm.
in the orbit around you. They still exist and
Yeah,
they have wants and needs. And I think that is I will say I think that is one of the hardest boundaries
yeah.
to create is the boundary of family and extended family. I I could be wrong, but
Mhm.
I just think that that's where the most amount of people get kinda tangled up.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's for, many reasons too, because especially once you start talking or looking at, like, your parents or your grandparents, right? Like, those were authority figures that you had growing up. They were people
Mhm.
who were older than you. So even when you get to be an adult, like, you almost feel bad or like you're not allowed to set a boundary with people that used to be authority figures for you. Like, I
Yeah.
I think that there's lots of emotions and bits of the previous history that really come into that where it almost seems undoable. It's like, "You know what? I'm not even gonna bother with it because I know they're gonna take it badly. I know they're gonna get upset. It's gonna cause a dramatic situation. I don't wanna deal with it, so it's easier for me to not even set a boundary
Mhm.
than to do it this way." So
Mhm.
I think to me at least, that's the dynamic that I think it's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure, for sure. We're gonna take a quick break, and then we will be right back. Hello, beautiful listeners. This is Kayla, your host. As you know, I am also a licensed therapist and specialize in working with couples and individuals on all things relationships and sex. If you are listening to this podcast, are a Washington state resident and feel like you would benefit from having more of these conversations alone or with your partner in a therapeutic setting, I would be happy to help you create the relationship and sex life you deserve and desire. You can visit my website, reclaimingstoriestherapy.com, learn more about my services, and schedule your free 30-minute video consultation online for us to chat more and see if we are a good fit to help you work towards your goals. As always, thank you for listening. And now back to the show. Right. Welcome back, listeners. We're diving back into talking about boundaries. And yes, Alex, just like you were saying, I think family is one of the hardest relationships or relationship dynamics to create boundaries with. And I think, like you were talking about with parents, especially, I think depending on how you were raised, some parents, especially in older generations where it was kind of like, children are to be seen and not heard. I don't think our generation was quite that
We're
bad,
not
but
quite that old, but I mean, we were
yeah,
a little bit past it. Maybe that was more our grandparents' generation from our age
yeah,
is a little bit, but
yeah. There's still people though that I hear that from. So I mean, it just depends. But my point here is that I think some people grow up in a household where they weren't really taught to set boundaries for themselves, that it was more, you just do what you're told by your parents and that's it. And then when they get out into the real world, it's really hard to set boundaries because they've never really practiced that and experienced what it was like to, set a boundary and have somebody else respect it and learn that dynamic. And a lot of us that I think have some type of insecure attachment either don't respect other people's boundaries and kind of bulldoze over other people's boundaries because they want to keep someone really close to them, and or kind of mold ourselves to other people and people please and just totally disregard our own boundaries and our own needs because we want, again, to keep people close to us. And we feel like if we assert the things that we want and need, that they're just going to leave because they think that that's mean or rude. Um, and
completely.
so I think there's a lot of dynamics that happen in childhood that lead to it being really, really difficult to set boundaries as an adult.
Oh, I get that one. I very much understand that one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
So,
think the more I'll kinda expand on that a little tiny bit. I think
yeah.
the more also different issues that you can bring in that humans have, um,
Mhm.
I think growing up in spaces like that can so exacerbate it, right? Like, if you have
Mhm.
somebody close to you with addiction problems or you have a family member with mental illness that's,
Mhm.
not well regulated.
Mhm.
I'll put it that way. Um, I think some of those dynamics too, you walk on eggshells for so long trying to keep
Mhm.
everything as contained as it can be and as together as it can be because you never
Mhm.
know with situations and people like who are struggling with things like that, their emotional bandwidth is not anywhere near what most of us are capable of.
Mhm.
So it becomes a situation of really tiptoeing and trying to make sure that you don't rock a boat in one way,
Mhm.
shape, or form because you don't really know what's gonna happen if you do, and you don't know how much worse where's it gonna snowball to? Like, how bad
Yeah.
is this gonna get if I do that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's really, really I've done bits of work on this from my past and things like that too, where I think you have to and it's funny that we come back to this word, even though it was odd to me at the start, but I'll use it again. I think that it comes back to when you feel like you have created a really safe relationship with this person where you know that making that boundary, like you said, it's not going to make them leave. It's not going to make them dip into a bad part of themselves. You're not going to Because I think that part of what's very interesting to me with boundaries is when we make them,
Mhm.
we almost feel completely responsible for the
Mhm.
emotion and the feeling that somebody else has from our boundary.
Mhm.
You feel responsible for it. So if someone's gonna get really upset or if they're gonna really go off the rails and do something really dangerous for themselves because you've done this,
Mhm.
I think the interesting part of it is where you take on the faults and you take on almost the blame. And there is no fault or blame to be had, but I think it's really common to hold that because
Mhm.
then you're looking at the situation you've caused and are kind of looking back going, well, I guess maybe if I didn't ask for this or do that,
Mhm.
they maybe wouldn't have reacted that way. And I
Yeah.
think in that way, I think it is also very, very important to kind of look at a more stoic approach of it and go, yes, we do have influences on other
Mhm.
people and the way they feel and the way they act. That is
Mhm.
100% true. You can't take that away completely. But
Mhm.
you also have to recognize at a certain point too that someone's emotions are their own emotions and that is
Mhm.
on them.
Yep.
If I drop my pen on the ground and I choose to get so upset that I start crying, and
Mhm.
if that bent out of shape over it, that's my emotion to that situation.
Right.
Nothing else caused that. I chose to escalate myself, and I think it gets harder too because as a person who I'm a very passionate person, I'm a very
Mhm.
emotional person. So I
Mhm.
can escalate pretty quickly with different things. But to me, I do always try to keep a little bit in mind that, yeah, somebody else's emotions are their own. I'm not
Mhm.
100% responsible for the way I made you feel or act.
Right.
I don't have to hold all of that. I can hold some of it. Like if you say something absolutely awful to another human being
Yeah.
and they're upset by it, well, yeah, that makes some sense. But to also disassociate a little bit with that and go, someone's emotions and feelings are their own
Mhm.
and I can recognize my influence, but I don't have to hold any more than that responsibility of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a boundary in itself, actually.
Really?
And yeah, it's
Oh,
boundary to
feel
know
that way?
that no, to know that I always say where you end and where someone else begins, because that's also another way of defining a boundary is
Okay.
knowing kind of where you end, meaning like, yeah, your responsibility, your own emotional state, and where somebody else begins, their own responsibility and their own emotional state. And I think that's where we kind of get the lines blurred a little bit when we don't have that clear boundary is people feeling like I have to take responsibility for somebody else's emotions or it's my job to fix how they're feeling or what actions they're doing. And it's like you have to have the boundary in place that other people are responsible for themselves and you're responsible for yourself. And of course, like you said, yeah, if you say something completely horrible to your partner or to, someone else on the street and they start crying, that is probably something that you should like apologize for and try to work on not doing.
You
But
hold some responsibility. Like you
yeah,
can't take all I'm trying to say is you can't take stoicism to the level of
right.
I can literally say a horrendously, disgustingly racist remark to you and expect you to just, you know what, calmly just sit there and just my
Mhm.
emotion is my emotion and I control what I do with your words and where I take
Yeah.
them. Like you got to have some responsibility a little bit when you're interacting with other people, I do think. But I try at times the best I can to
Mhm.
still remember that other people's emotions are their emotions.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or the other one of where I heard this is a little off topic, but it's not that off topic in my mind.
Mhm.
But we'll see. I was listening to someone who leads HR for different global companies and things like that and does a lot of seminars on it and so lots of different relationship dynamics.
Mhm.
The very interesting thing that I heard that person talking about the other day was that, if somebody responds to you or says something to you in a certain way, right?
Mhm.
You can respond to their words, but you don't need to respond to their tone. And I thought that was a very interesting boundary in
Mhm.
itself because
Mhm.
I think that as humans, we have such a history of storytelling, right? And there's emotion behind storytelling. So the way that somebody says something to you, the emotion, the tone, all of that, we're very perceptive to that.
Right.
And we take some people not as much as others, but most people are very receptive to that, right? So if you
Mhm.
asked at the start of this and said, "Hey, Alex, how's your week been?" Fine, it's fine, whatever. It's whatever. If that's how I respond,
Mhm.
that's a pretty passive aggressive way to respond to that. So what she was kind of alluding to is, okay, when people do that to you in a situation, respond to their words, don't respond to the tone, and
Yeah.
recognize the difference between those. And okay, you're fine. It's whatever. That's great. I'm glad that it's fine and everything is just what it is for you. Great. If you need something from me later, let me know and exit. It's so that I thought was a very, since we're talking about boundaries, I thought that was a really interesting boundary to create within
Mhm.
any of your relationship. So there's work, partner, family, whoever, but very interesting to respond to the words being said, not necessarily always the tone. And I
Mhm.
that in itself can kind of create a nice little buffer for both parties.
Absolutely. I would just take that, like, one step further just as,
You
like,
do?
the caring therapist in me. I would want to know what's going on for that
With the
person
I
because
know.
obviously there's something going on, so I wouldn't wanna just, like, leave them and be like, "Okay, bye," because obviously the fine does not sound like a fine.
No.
Um, so personally, I would try to pry a little bit more, but yeah, having the ability to kind of calm your own body down and respond in a way that is not matching their tone, but being
Yes.
calm in the moment, responding to their words, and then maybe, having the ability to like sit down with them and say, like, what's really going on. And I will just say in my own life, since I feel like we haven't had a lot of personal examples in this. I think again, there are people that are easier to do that with than others. As a therapist, I'm trained very well to respond calmly to people, having a lot of emotion in front of me. I deal with that on a day-to-day basis. So and definitely having a toddler, like that's a crash course in
That's just a
really
land of
having
nothing other than emotion.
yeah, and really having to like be as calm as possible when you have a toddler melting down in front of you.
For no
Uh,
reason whatsoever.
Well, I mean, there's always reasons for it, but yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's really hard, especially when you become a little bit of a punching bag. Um, but I will say, like, with my mom and I, we are really working on this. And anytime she gets escalated in her tone and gets irritated, we are so similar. And again, I think it's really hard with parents too, because
Yep.
I will say that they kind of created our buttons. And so anytime they push them, it's really hard to not react to them. And yeah,
Yeah, it's
anytime
like,
she gets
this. You know I'm gonna get upset. Why would you even pull this into it? You know. It's that yep.
because it's their own emotional state, and so anytime my mom gets irritated or snaps at me, I immediately go down that road too, and I start snapping back at her, and then, 3 or 4 minutes down the road, I'm like, "Ugh, I'm doing it again. I shouldn't do this. I need to, like, not go down this road," but it always happens, and it's so hard to, like, have that boundary of, like, "No, I'm not gonna react to you in the way that I always have." Um, because she gets annoyed at the same stuff I get annoyed at too. And so it's really difficult sometimes with different relationships to hold the boundaries that might be easier to hold with other people. Um, yeah, as boundaries are really, really hard, guys.
They're not yeah, and I mean, I'm never, ever, ever trying to just shit on men because 'cause they're great and they're amazing, and I will say there's a ton of shit we can learn from the way that they're kind of
Mm,
taught and historically and societally, they're what they're kind of molded into a little bit, right?
Mhm.
But I will say, as women especially, and I'm not trying to make this a big, well, we always have it worse. No, it's not what I'm trying to do, but girls are taught to be more accommodating. We
Yep.
are taught to think more of the other person and this and that. And I'm not
Yep.
saying boys aren't either, but just historically, women are w- looked at, I think, at times as more nurturing figures. So
Yeah.
that means that because somehow our gender and our biological makeup apparently makes us more nurturing. I will say, I do not think I'm a nurturing person really at all. My significant other, he's phenomenally nurturing. I am not. And I am a female.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that, but I will say the way that I think girls are taught to mitigate conflict and things
Mhm.
when we're young
Yeah.
is that we forgive, we look at this,
Yeah.
we try to see it from the other side, and we kind of, I don't wanna say give in, but we do kinda give in a little bit, like, we're
Mhm.
taught more to give in, not to hold our ground and, like,
Yep.
hold this. We're taught more, how can we move this forward to completely get rid of this tension, this problem, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And I think that that's also a big thing to note for, any women who do struggle with this is I think we do have to also look at it and go, well, unfortunately, we were a little trained to be this way.
Yeah.
That was kind of
Absolutely.
it was bred into us a bit to try to be that way more often.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think that men got that quite as much as we did.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. I think men tend to be taught to be more individual focused and set kind of on, just like I only have to worry about what I need and what I want. And women are the ones that are supposed to be communal and worrying about everyone else's needs and often at the detriment of their own. Um, and again, definitely not 100% across the board because I
No,
also work with a lot of men, and I would say my husband kind of falls into this as well, that actually have a really hard time setting boundaries for themselves and doing things that are important for them, for their mental health and well being.
completely. Which,
And
yes, and I think it gets put on us in different ways, right? Like,
yeah.
and this is gonna be, I don't know, this might sound like a really dumb example, right? But
Mhm.
since you brought that up with Albert, that's a really, it's interesting that I was so proud of Connor today, so proud of him. God, it makes me sound like I have a child. It's not a child. But because he texted me this morning when I was at the gym, and he had said, "Hey, I think I'm gonna leave the office at 1 today,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna come home and grab my clothes, and I'm gonna go to the gym because as much as for whatever reason he thinks he needs to, like, lose more weight and tone up and whatever for our wedding. It's kind of funny, we're opposites on that. I'm like, "I'm just kinda rocking and rolling and maintaining and kinda moving along here," and he's like, "I need to be in the gym more. I need to be doing this." And it's not for me, it's for him. Like, it's something that's
Mhm.
important to him and how he
Mhm.
feels about himself. So his self-care and his mental well-being, he would like to be able to go more than he really does, and
Mhm.
he'll stay at the office longer hours, he'll be there earlier, he'll put aside the things that he needs for himself a little bit to feel better,
Mhm.
to make sure that he's doing all these other things that pertain to parts of our life,
Mhm.
to contribute, to do all these different things. And I just think you bring up a really good point where I do think it's harder for them to sometimes do that, and I always feel bad, and so I 100% when he texted me that day, I encouraged the hell out of it. I was like, "I think that's a great idea. You deserve
Mhm.
to leave a little early. You deserve to go have some time for yourself today and do that
Mhm.
if that's what you want and that's what you need. You're 100% entitled to that." So I
Mhm.
think with you saying that to me, I also look at it and I'm like, it's a bit of a balance
It's totally a balance.
for us to recognize what our partners need. And I think
Mhm.
for people like you and Albert, especially once you guys bring a child in your life, I think it's
It's
even
so hard.
more important. It's harder and
It's
it's
so
also even
hard.
more important because,
Yeah,
yeah, how there aren't enough hours in the day. And
there
honestly,
really aren't.
that's a very American thing of us to say, 'cause if we went to other countries, they'd be like, "What the fuck? What are you fucking talking about, guys? Come on." But, with the way that we're bred to constantly be moving in this country, moving, shaking, hustling, doing this, doing that,
Mhm.
doing all these things at home, doing all these things at the office for all those people, and then everywhere else, it's too much. So, it's
Yeah.
just I do think it's very important to recognize that, even maybe sometimes when your partner isn't great at setting even a boundary for themselves for something they might want or need, when on the times when you notice them doing it and creating that space to really to be encouraging of it.
Mhm.
'Cause
Yeah.
I think that really does help.
Yeah. Absolutely. And like you're saying, especially in a partnership and especially once kids enter into the picture, trying to make sure that you don't feel like one person's needs are greater than the other because both people really need help and um, encouragement to take that time for themselves. And I think, especially, in our culture, we're still trying to navigate women being more of the caregivers and
Yeah.
men still typically being the ones that are working more outside of the home when it comes to kids. And definitely not again across the board. There's so many different iterations of this, but I do still feel like we're the generation that's trying to break the mold, but we still don't really know how to do it. And so I still feel like it still falls a lot
Oh,
along those guidelines.
it totally does.
And so, depending on what role you're playing in the household, it can be easy to feel like, well, my partner has it so much better because, they just get to stay home with the kids all day, or my partner has it so much better because they get to go out of the house and actually work all day. And I think both people are working really hard no matter what your
What you're
role is,
doing.
no matter what you're doing in the household. If you are helping and contributing to your household, you are doing a lot and you deserve to have whatever break you need to like rejuvenate yourself. So, or to ask for the things that you need from your partner to help, like doing the dishes, cleaning the house, like doing whatever you need to do for the kids. I think all of that oftentimes needs to be negotiated and also know that nothing is ever set in stone. These things
No.
all the time
Things
are
are
in flux.
fluid.
Yeah.
You can move, you can shake, you can change, you can do a lot with it. It's I think it's just coming into it with maybe the mindset of constantly being as open-minded as we can.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm really bad with this. I'm horrible at this. I
Mhm.
like routines. I like to do the same thing at the same times with the same
Yeah.
all of it. Like I thrive off of that. And so for
Mhm.
me, it's really hard to get out of that and go, no, 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 that's not my normal routine, but we have to kinda be fluid with stuff, and I think you
Mhm.
do just make a great point in especially the dynamics around how we navigate our home, work life, everything with our relationship with, our the family that we've created, our partners, whoever, that, yeah, we have to recognize that there are different seasons for everything, and throughout those seasons, you or your partner, whoever, might need different things. So it's
Mhm.
okay to make changes based on that and be perfectly okay with that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of different things that we're talking about here and definitely setting boundaries comes down to again, what's okay for you, what's not okay for you, and then I think how that's negotiated within the family aspect can be sometimes around the things that we need from our partner. Like, I need time to myself. So I'm going to create a boundary that, like, I'm not going to do XYZ in the home so that I can take the time that I need. And I need my partner to respect that and like help me out so that I can go take that time. So I think boundaries come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, but I think essentially it comes down to yeah, how do we protect our little bubble and create the space and time that we need to take care of ourselves? And I just, as we are wrapping up, I just wanted to bring this back to um, what happens if we don't hold boundaries. I think is really important that a lot of what I see in myself, honestly, and in my clients is when we don't hold boundaries, a lot of time resentment gets built up over time because we're
Yeah.
constantly shoving the things that we need and want down and not speaking up about those things,
It
and
makes a bigger blow up later.
it makes a bigger blow up later, and I think it actually continues to tell yourself that, like, you don't matter, and
You don't deserve
really,
this.
you don't deserve this, and you're taking your power away, and I will say I'm
100%.
not gonna get into the nitty-gritty of this story because it's still something that I'm contending with in my own life, but there was particular thing around my wedding that um I didn't hold the boundary that I wish I would have, and I think that was probably the biggest letdown that I've ever done to myself. I really regretted not holding that boundary,
It's one
and
thing you look back and you really wish you would have done.
yes. Yeah. And it really felt like I didn't stand up for myself and I just kind of caved to what other people's needs and wants were in order to save that relationship. And it actually made the relationship, I think,
Worse.
worse, in my opinion, because I didn't put myself first. And then I built up a lot of resentment around the fact that I had to do that for the other person, even though it was my own choice.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think, knowing that Brene Brown puts it really well, and I might put this little video, it's a really short, like 5-minute video that I send to a lot of my clients in our show notes, but she talks about how um, you really can't have empathy without boundaries. You can't have compassion without boundaries. That boundaries are so essential for us to actually have close relationships with other people. That if we are constantly giving into what everyone else wants and being a yes person, we are so depleted and we are going to be resentful and angry at the other people in our lives. And again, blame them for not taking care of us, even though it's us that needs to take care of us. And so when we have our boundaries, when we fill our cup and we know that we're taking care of ourselves in the way that we need to, and that means holding the boundaries that we need to with other people and saying no to the things that we need to say no to, it actually allows us to be so much kinder to other people, so much more respectful and compassionate to other people and empathetic that we can, they say in the video, we can tread that water forever. We can have an overflow of always finding the best in other people when we are holding the boundaries that we need and continuing to fill ourselves up with the things that we need to just live the life that feels good to us. So, I think it's so important for people to understand the why behind boundaries because it's not just we're just, willy-nilly putting some barriers up and calling it good, and it's not mean to other people. It's really for us to feel like we can be whole, full people and then give back in full to the people around us as well.
Yeah. Before we go, there's one thing though that I do kind of want to ask about or,
Sure.
just touch on really quickly, right?
Yeah.
So, where we've gone with this is yeah, it's completely okay to ask for it. It's okay to enforce it. It's
Mhm.
encouraged. You should. You really
Mhm.
should.
Yeah.
But the only thing I will bring up though is if you keep having maybe a recurring issue with somebody when you are
Mhm.
trying to enforce your boundary or anything, right?
Mhm.
And they're not taking it so well.
Mhm.
Tell me if I'm wrong or not, but I will say I do think there's also sometimes maybe a place, definitely, and there's some space in there to at a different time if you're constantly running into this issue with a person when you assert or hold on to your boundary,
Mhm.
going to them and maybe just before taking it anywhere else, looking at it and saying to them, okay, is there a way in the way that I'm trying to communicate this boundary to you that is making it harder for you to respect it?
Mm,
Is there a way that I can phrase this, say this, ask for this in a way that is more digestible for you?
mhm.
That's, I guess, my only flip side of the coin where of my little baby bit of devil's advocate, just to ask on is am I being crazy by kinda having that a little bit by saying, "Okay, maybe if you keep running into this though, maybe just kinda ask that person, is there something," and I don't wanna say that I'm trying to put more work on us as, we need to do more to make you accept my boundary. That's not what I'm
Mhm,
saying, but just considering the option that maybe certain people take information in very different ways. So at least
mhm,
maybe if you're running into that over and over again,
mhm.
seeing if going about it that way might help them digest your boundary better and then be able to respect it.
Yeah, I mean, I think more communication is always helpful if that person, again, is willing to receive that and talk to you about that, great. I think we will definitely get into communication techniques in later episodes, but, always coming from a place of I is a really good way to present different things to whoever you're talking about. When we get into a lot of you do this, you do that,
It's
one, that's
blame focused. It's
it's
not that
yeah.
takes it to a different context.
Yeah, it's blame focus, and that's also not how you should be stating a boundary, because it's about you. So, um, yeah, I would, if you consistently are having an issue, but feel comfortable to have a conversation like that,
Yeah.
absolutely. I will say there may be people that always are just going to not be
And
great about
I
accepting boundaries,
I
and
totally
sometimes
I totally understand that one.
yeah,
I get that.
yeah,
I just meant for somebody where I think you can kinda maybe see that this really could be very valuable and they
mhm,
could handle it pretty well, but maybe is it just not coming in the right format for them.
yeah, yeah.
You're sending a text, do they need an email? Best way I can honestly say it,
I would say probably a phone call or a face to face so that you
God love
have
you, it's the
better
love of fucking communication, of course you fucking would, but for
Yeah,
for this analogy
yeah,
you're doing one way, maybe give somebody else maybe they just need it packaged in a different way.
sure. Yeah. I mean, more communication is always better. I don't think there's ever, like, too much communication unless you're just, dumping stuff onto somebody that doesn't need to be dumped, but if
Yeah,
it's about the dynamic between the 2 of you, I think, yeah, always
okay.
always talk it through. If something is not working, yeah, have some empathy of where their perspective is and what their processing is of you saying this boundary, like, where are they taking it? And if you can understand that, maybe you can find a way to word it in a way where they can understand better where you're coming from and what you need.
Exactly. That's all I was kinda trying to get at is that maybe with certain people, sometimes if you do maybe keep running into that issue,
Mhm.
maybe that's a way to possibly mitigate that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely not an exhausted conversation on boundaries. Boundaries are so, so hard. I will also say, too, just one little tidbit that we can also go to the opposite side of things as you were kind of playing devil's advocate of being too boundaried. That some people
Of
just
course,
have,
we can't be that rigid. You
yeah,
cannot not let anyone to have and make any space or have an
right,
opinion or anything like that. You don't run the world.
right,
You're not in control of everybody. This is not a dictatorship. You don't
right,
get to choose that for people. So I love that you say
right.
that we can have a boundary, but maybe recognize if you have a boundary surrounding absolutely every bit and part of all of your life and everything you do,
Mm,
that's just not going to, it's probably not going to be helpful for you. It's going to
right.
hinder you as opposed to help you.
Right. Because again, boundaries are supposed to help you actually be in better relationship with other people. It should help you have an easier time,
Not make it harder.
not make it harder. And so when we have too many walls up to where nobody can get in, that
You've just defeated the
means,
purpose.
yeah, you've defeated the purpose. So we want to create the boundaries in the space that we need around us, but making it so that, yeah, there is permeability where we can, have people be close to us and hear us and see us and not feel like we're behind, the wall with a moat around it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, all right, guys. Well, that's our episode for today. I feel like this was a little bit heavier of an episode. I feel like there wasn't as much laughter and
This
um
wasn't no, but here's the one thing I will say though for this episode that has made me think. You've brought up some interesting topics that maybe we might explore down the road a little bit, such as maybe like literally an episode of boundaries within weddings. Like, hey, guess what, guys? We're getting to spring and summer, which is wedding
yeah.
season. Are
Yeah.
you planning a wedding? Are you dealing with that right now? What is that looking like in a specific dynamic such as something like that or a situation?
Yeah.
We might take this some other places at different times, 100%. Like, I can see
Yeah.
this going into surrounding birth, surrounding a wedding. There's
Oh,
lots of
totally.
places where boundaries can get very mucked up that
Absolutely.
so we may make this funnier at different times with other different things, and we'll bring it in other topics because I do think this is a fundamental part of relationships. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
but
love that.
we hope you guys get and got something out of this today.
Yeah.
And if like you have one tidbit that you can bring back, then we feel great about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I love that. Thank you for bringing that up because those were great ideas. And yeah, this is a big topic that can be broken down into a lot of different things. So, stay tuned for more episodes on all things relationships and sex as usual. We are going to sign off here. I think we did a great job today, and we'll pat ourselves on the back.
I love this one, guys.
Job well done.
Thank you for chit chat and boundaries.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning in. As usual, we would love if you could follow us on Apple, Spotify, all the places that you find this podcast. Go click the follow button. I think, we used to say subscribe, but I'm pretty sure most platforms it's follow. And please leave us a comment, question, anything that you want to tell us about the podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at Her On Top Pod. And as usual, we just would love for you to tune into our next episode in 2 weeks. And with that, we will see you guys next time. Take care.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.